One moment. Hello everybody. I'm Oni or Onya Sanu. This is Weekly Pan-African News. If you cannot hear me, if you just see me moving my lips, give a shout. Hopefully, because I guess if my mic wasn't working, you couldn't hear me say that. But hopefully, if I'm just talking and there's no sound, y'all will put it in the comments. But thank you for joining us. We are going to get started in just a few minutes. We're just going to let folks trickle in like we always do. If you are watching right now, share the stream, share the feed. Thank you. Thank you, Arthur. Thanks for sharing. Thank you, Miriam. Thanks for sharing. Thank y'all for watching. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. We have a really good show, as always. I might start laughing because I'm thinking about Joe Biden. How he keeps saying a racist thing. Oh my God. All right. Yeah, last night the headline was he was saying Donald Trump was like first racist U.S. president, and there's always like this dance whenever Biden speaks, because he can't like speak without saying something's racist or imperialist or sexually assaulty, and so he'll say something like that, and people will be like, what the hell? And then like from out of nowhere, all these like lesser evil people would like come out of the woodwork and be like, shh, don't criticize him, don't mention it, don't talk about it, because their concern is that, you know, if people just like repeat what Biden said or talk about it, that folks will be discouraged from voting for him and Trump will win again. And I'm just kind of like, that's quite a devil's bargain y'all have made, because the man can't stop. Like, he can't stop. Like, that's just who he is. Like, he literally cannot stop saying horrible things. It's just who he is as a person. It's reflecting his politics. So like, if that was me, if I was like a person that believed that Joe Biden of all people was like the only hope to avoid the apocalypse, I would probably work on like not trying to control what people say, but rather like just like owning him in his entirety, and then trying to explain to people why that person in his entirety is somehow their savior. Like, don't try to control people just being like, why is he saying that? Instead, be like, it's okay that he's saying that because, like, really just like stand in your truth. If you're gonna back up like a racist rapist, then just like stand fully in that and like embrace the racist rapist part of him, rather than getting people to stop talking about it. But yeah, he's funny. It was funny he said that. It's ridiculous. The first racist U.S. president, that's who Trump is. Like, not even the ones that like owned slaves. Like, the ones that owned African people are not racist. The ones that like raped African people are not racist. The ones that like genocided indigenous people aren't racist. The ones that like bombed all kinds of countries and invaded them for trying to end colonialism aren't racist. Like, okay. Like, that's weird. I would like to know what Joe Biden's definition of racism is. But anywho, I'm glad y'all can hear me. The comment on Facebook was like, yes, just own it. Just own that he's a rapist. Just own that he's a racist. Stop trying to deny it. Stop trying to get us to stop talking about it. Just own it. Just like stand in your truth. Live in there. Could not be me, but if that's what you're going to do, just like stand in it. Anywho. So it's 11:05. We got like a nice little audience. We can go ahead and get started in the interest of being militant. One day we're going to start this show at 11 on the dot. It's going to be great. But anyway, my name is Oni Sanmu. I am an organizer with the New Mexico chapter of the All African People's Revolutionary Party. The All African People's Revolutionary Party is a revolutionary, Pan-African, mass socialist political party based in Africa, founded in Africa 52 years ago by Kwame Nkrumah. If you don't know who Kwame Nkrumah is, he was the first democratically elected president of the first nation in Africa to gain independence from European colonialism. That nation was Ghana. When Ghana gained its independence, Kwame Nkrumah was like, look, every single nation around us is colonized. We are on a continent that is being exploited and controlled by imperialist powers. And so while Ghana has gained its independence, it doesn't really mean anything if we're completely surrounded by enemy territory. In order for Ghana to be free forever, in order for Africa to be free forever, every single nation in Africa should be free. The entire African continent should be unified and socialist. And so the objective of the All African People's Revolutionary Party is Pan-Africanism, which we define as one unified socialist Africa. Because when Africa is unified and socialist, African people everywhere will be free. So that's who we are. This is our show, Weekly Pan-African News Live. We do it every single Thursday right here at 11 a.m. Mountain Time. And the reason we started this show, we started it in March when the first lockdown started happening in the United States, because we noticed that there was a lot of bad information coming from the very tippity top here in the United States. For example, the CDC told people for 2 straight months not to wear masks, and it caused thousands of deaths, mostly of African and indigenous people. And so we were like, if these people are not going to give our folks the information we need to survive this pandemic, then we are going to make our own platform and put that information out there ourselves. In addition to that, as African people, particularly as revolutionary African people, we know that if we hear anything about Africa or Africans on CNN, MSNBC, Huffington Post, Fox, it's going to be racist. It's going to be full of lies. And so again, we want to make our own platform, our own lane, so we could speak to y'all from a revolutionary African perspective and give y'all news about African and Africans that is not racist, and that is not imperialist, and that is not pro-capitalist. So this is our platform, Weekly Pan-African News Live. And as always, we want to open by saying that we are speaking to y'all from occupied Tiwa territory, also known as the city of Albuquerque in New Mexico. It's occupied Tiwa territory because the Tiwa Pueblo are the rightful owners of this land. It is still their land. The United States, just when Europeans came to this hemisphere, they stole a bunch of land from a lot of people that are still here, and this land will always be theirs, because it doesn't matter how long ago you stole something, that item, that land, that thing is still stolen. So just like we are fighting to get Africa back for Africans, this land belongs to the Tiwa people, and while we are here organizing our people, we will do everything in our power to make sure they get this land back. So speaking to y'all from occupied Tiwa territory, this will always be Tiwa territory, and if we have anything to do with it, the Tiwa people will get their land back. The other thing we always do to start every single show is we call in an ancestor, an African ancestor. And the reason why we do that is because we understand, we as the All African People's Revolutionary Party, we as African revolutionaries are part of a continuum of struggle that started from the very first moment the very first Europeans set foot on the shores of Africa centuries ago. We are not just brand new out here. We are not reinventing the wheel. We are part of a continuum of struggle. I would not be here speaking to y'all if not for many, many, many thousands of African people that struggled and fought and learned for me to be here. So we would be remiss if we did not bring in our ancestors, if we did not acknowledge the groundwork they laid that make it possible for us to struggle today. So the ancestor we want to call in to have in the space to ground us in the conversation today is Frantz Fanon. If you don't know who that is, I recommend you Google it, Frantz Fanon. But he was a famous Pan-African revolutionary. He was an African man born in the Caribbean who lived in France, who fought in the Algerian Revolution, who saw masses of African people organized collectively to overthrow colonialism. And in that process of participating in that struggle, in that process of analyzing and learning to understand colonialism, he wrote a number of works, a number of books that are really, really famous, that have inspired revolutions all over the world. Probably the most famous and my personal favorite is The Wretched of the Earth. And that's a book he wrote right after the success of the Algerian Revolution against France, where he basically talks about how that shit happened, what happened afterwards, and the lessons that were taken from it. So groups of course the APRP, but also the Black Panther Party, and also a number, any number of anti-colonial revolutionary movements have looked to the analysis of Frantz Fanon to understand what it is we need to do to end colonialism. So he is absolutely someone we uphold, someone we are grateful to have existed, someone who is a strong part of the lineage of Pan-Africanism. And so we're bringing him in today. Thank you, Frantz Fanon. Read Wretched of the Earth, look that shit up. Also, Black Skin, White Mask is a really, really deep book where he's basically talking about what it's like to be an African in Western imperialist society, and how how much that fucks with you, to be honest. That's what that book is about. So definitely check out the work of Frantz Fanon. Another really good book is, oh my God. He wrote a book about ending colonialism in the African world, and I forget the title, but that's like really key, and people don't necessarily realize that Frantz Fanon was a Pan-Africanist, but he absolutely was. So read his words, and thank you, Frantz Fanon, for your example. Anywho, oh my God, I had the wrong overlay up this whole time. Here we go. Blah, blah. So this week on the show, we have a very special political education topic. I feel like it's special every single time, but it is special every single time. So every single show we do political education because we, as the All-African People's Revolutionary Party, understand that you cannot build a revolution with the sleeping people. In order for the masses of African people to take up the work collectively we need to do to liberate ourselves, we first need to understand our condition, and we first need to understand our enemy. And so the purpose of political education is to develop that consciousness, is to develop that understanding of our condition and our enemy and what we can do to address that condition and defeat the enemy. And so you are not ever going to go to an All-African People's Revolutionary Party event without there being some aspect of political education, and this show is no exception. Every single episode, we always have a segment that's dedicated just to fleshing out a specific topic, a specific political education or PE topic. And so this week, the topic is, should Africans organize, arm, and engage white supremacists? The example of the not fucking around crew. And also the question of what is the role of guns and arms in the struggle for African revolution, and the question of symbolism versus strategy. So, some context. If you don't know who the not fucking around crew is, I guarantee you've probably seen them. Because a couple of weeks ago, a number of images went viral, across the African side of the internet, and there's definitely an African side of the internet. Basically, hundreds of African men were pictured marching in Georgia near Stone Mountain. Stone Mountain's a really famous bastion of the Ku Klux Klan. They have demonstrations there on a yearly basis. I believe they had some kind of founding meeting there. Ronald Reagan gave a speech there once because he's a motherfucking racist. Or he was, because he's dead, and hell no. But, so anyway, these this group of hundreds of African men went to this Stone Mountain, this bastion of white supremacy in the South, and they were in formation. They were in a long line, a very long march, and they were open carrying, holding weapons. So, not fucking around crew, that's who organized that action. That's who brought all those African men together. That's presumably the organization that those African men are in. And so when those images went spread across the internet, it had a very positive response from our people. Our people were, and this was coming after weeks of police terrorizing us, of European vigilantes terrorizing us during Black Lives Matter protests. And so when our people saw this, there was a very strong positive response, because it was basically a group of African men saying, if y'all are going to come to us with this energy, we are going to match it. If you're going to come into our communities and harm us, if you're going to come into our communities with weapons, we are going to show you that we have weapons too, that we mean to meet you with the same energy you're coming with. And so for a people that has been exploited and oppressed in the United States and all over the world for so long, for a people who has been sold a particular line about how we have to remain passive in the face of violence, that was a very, very powerful thing to see. Because what we're taught is the Bridge in Selma kind of example, where you just get the shit beaten out of you, and people just watch that and they're supposed to feel bad, and if you ever raise your hand, if you ever try to fight back, then you're wrong. So having that be the messaging that's been sent to us for a very, very long time, to see Africans being nope, we have guns and we're going to shoot back, is very, very, very different and very empowering. And so you understand why when our people saw that, we were hell yes, because it's a very, very different message than what we're typically sent. The other thing, wide response, outside the African internet, outside the African community, was lots of fear and skepticism on the part of Europeans. Lots of Europeans trying to find anything they could to kind of discredit that example, because when Africans appear organized and armed, it strikes an existential fear into the heart of Europeans for reasons that should be obvious. There is a fear that we are going to do to them what they have done systematically to us for centuries. And so when they see us with guns, they're holy shit. It's very, very similar to what happened when the Black Panthers went to the California state capitol. And then all of a sudden, California was passing all kinds of gun laws to deal with that. As soon as they see us appearing to be organized and also being armed, it becomes a threat. So that is the context, like what we're talking, going to be leading the conversation with today. And so some things. First off, from the very beginning, I want to make it clear that we're the All African People's Revolutionary Party. So that should tell you off top that we have absolutely no issue with Africans arming themselves. We believe in the necessity of armed struggle. We believe in the necessity, inevitability of armed revolution. We are coming directly from a particular lineage of African politics which saw the masses of our people take up arms to overthrow colonialism. I'm talking about the struggle against Portuguese colonialism in Guinea-Bissau. I'm talking about the armed struggle against apartheid and settler colonialism in Southern Africa and Tanzania. I'm talking about the Algerian Revolution. I'm talking about the Black Panther Party. Like, there is a long history of armed struggle within the African National Liberation Movement that my organization, the APRP, is directly connected to. So off top, we are not anti-gun. We are not anti-armed struggle. We are not like nonviolent resistance only. We understand that in order to ultimately liberate our people, an armed struggle is going to be necessary. So that's like off top. Like, we do not have any problem whatsoever with African people organizing and taking up guns, because we understand that we have done that with great success. And it's often only that strategy that has saved our people when we have been up against this system. So that's off top. We believe in the armed struggle in the All African People's Revolutionary Party. However, this is the issue with actions like the one that happened in Georgia, right? It's not so much like they were marching in Stone Mountain. They allegedly marched to like the Klan's headquarters in Georgia, right? What happened when they got there? I wasn't there. I don't know. What I do know is that the Klan headquarters is still there. What I do know is that no confrontation happened with the Klan. What I do know is that the Klan is still operating in Georgia. So regardless of that march to that location and that like show of power on the part of those Africans, the actual condition when it comes to white supremacist organizing in that area has not been changed. It looked really good. It was very empowering to see that. But the reality of the situation is that the Klan is still building in Georgia. The Klan is still building nationwide. White supremacists are still building power inside and outside of the U.S. government. So despite hundreds of African men taking up arms and making this show of force, what was actually accomplished, you know? And like, that's kind of the issue, right? With like seeing a picture like that and being like, this is the way, this is the strategy, things are going to be different now. Because if we allow just seeing the image to have us like give an emotional response and we're not looking deeper at what's actually being accomplished, we're going to be happy with like symbolism, with symbols, with like acts of like performative resistance, rather than like the actual organization we're going to need to end white supremacy and to end the organization of European vigilantes inside and outside of the government that are trying to come for our people. Like, we cannot accept, as a people that has been oppressed and colonized for centuries, any form of symbolism as a replacement for the deep organization we need to defend and protect our people. Like, we do not, like, we understand fully why those brothers did that. We support fully the strategy of our people organizing and taking up arms. We cannot support symbolic actions. We cannot support symbolic actions that don't have any change in our circumstances. And that's, to be honest, that's what happened in Georgia. Like, we have a tendency, and it's like not our fault. It's kind of what's been done to our struggle under capitalism. We as African people have a tendency to accept symbolism as a form of resistance. Like, a really, really clear example of this is like Barack Obama, the first African president, right? Like, to this day, when people talk about what he represented to African people, what he did for us as African people, the focus is always on what he represented as a symbol. Because if you look at it, what his actual actions were, he was responsible for the largest expansion of the U.S. military presence in the history of the U.S. government in the form of AFRICOM. It was under Barack Obama that the U.S. military drastically expanded its footprint in our homeland. He was responsible for transferring hundreds of millions of dollars in military weapons to police agencies all over the United States. Like, the reason why Black Lives Matter protests are being met with tanks and military weapons, in some cases drones, and these police that are like prepared for war, is because of the 1033 program, which is drastically expanded under Barack Obama. The 1033 program gives surplus military equipment to police agencies around the U.S. for free. And under Bush, it was like $5 million. Under Barack Obama, it was $300 million. Expanded to $300 million of that equipment being given to U.S. police that is now being used to seriously injure Black Lives Matter protesters. So we can say, like, it's very, like, it's powerful symbolism or whatever to see an African U.S. president, but if we focus on the symbol and not on what he actually did, it doesn't allow us to seriously assess what he means for us and whether or not he hurt us or helped us. And that's kind of the issue. Like, that's one example, but there's like a long history of symbolism being accepted instead of like actual results within our struggle. So like I said, there's nothing wrong at all with African people organizing and taking up weapons. There's nothing wrong at all with African people engaging European vigilantes and the state with the same energy we're met. But what we cannot do is allow just like empty symbols, just like things that look good, to be the strategy. What needs to happen is that our communities on a block by block level at all generations in all sectors need to be organized to defend our people. It can't just be a couple hundred dudes with guns in one place doing a march and going home. It needs to be every single African community in the United States, on the continent, and around the diaspora, organized at every single level, every age, from the nanas to the babies, to defend African people, to defend our communities. And that kind of work is not going to happen with one march. That kind of work is going to take years of deep relationship building and organizing, the kind of work that the All African People's Revolutionary Party does wherever we exist. But the reality of the situation is that the number of our people who are active in revolutionary organizations that are doing this kind of deep work to build this kind of defense and protection for African people it's like a very small minority of the masses of our people. The majority see pictures of the Not Fucking Around crew and they share and then they go about their business. They're not in any kind of organization. They're not building what we need to make something like that possible on a massive scale. To make it so instead of marching to the Klan's door and going home, we go up in there and we tear up their shit and they can never organize again. We have like the numbers to do that. We just don't have the organization to do that. So yeah, that's kind of like the main thing, is that like that what the Not Fucking Around crew did was cool, but it's not enough. And it didn't change anything on the ground in Georgia. It just put up a very good symbol, but nothing else has changed. The Klan is still there. So that's like the question of like strategy versus symbolism. But there's like another question about this, like another issue, right? Where the majority of the folks that were out there in Georgia were African men. And we are not like an anti-man organization. Like, there's nothing wrong off top with African men taking up guns, particularly in this society where African men are treated as like a threat, where African men are supposed to be like uncivilized or whatever. Like, African men organizing and taking up arms is positive. But there's like also a very long history of men with guns being followed by oppressive behavior that oppresses and exploits African women, non-men, and children. Like, if you look at the history of men with guns, like the recent history of men with guns in African communities and cities across the U.S., and also in cities and communities across Africa, it's not positive. And that's not because there's anything intrinsically wrong with African men. That's because of the contradictions created by colonialism, created by capitalism. People talk about the concept of like crabs in a barrel, right? Where there's lots of violence and like harm within the African community that we're doing to each other. And we're taught that it's because there's something wrong with us. But the reality is we've been put into conditions that make it so we are desperately poor, that make it so we do not have access to mental health care, that make it so we do not have access to basic resources to keep our community safe and to keep ourselves healthy. And so when you're put in a situation like that, when you're put in a situation of desperate poverty, when you're put in a situation with a lack of access to resources, it results in intracommunal violence. But a lot of that violence is coming from men, and a lot of that violence is happening with guns. And so, like, just African men with guns as, like, a strategy is not going to work. It's just not going to work. That's why I emphasized before that if we're going to organize African communities for community defense, that we need to have every single sector of those communities involved. It cannot just be the brothers. It has to be the mothers. It has to be the sisters. It has to be the kids. It has to be every motherfucking sector of the African community trained in the same way, but also, importantly, with political education to develop an analysis that will stop us from harming each other the way colonialism has taught us to. So, like, we have to be honest about what men with guns has been in African and colonized communities, and we have to do intentional work to change that, to change what's been happening, to change what neocolonialism and colonialism has forced us to do to each other. Otherwise, it's just going to be a lot of violence, and it's going to be upon African people. So this is the reality situation. So I talked briefly about strategy versus symbolism, about what the Not Fucking Around crew was doing versus what we need to happen. And so I just want to reiterate that we believe in armed self-defense. We believe in armed struggle. But we also understand that that shit's not going to work without deep organizing in our communities. And that kind of organizing to build these relationships, to build infrastructure, to build things like schools and medical facilities and independent ways of like feeding our people and like producing food, that kind of work is not going to happen without strong revolutionary organizations. The All African People's Revolutionary Party is one such organization. The Ujima People's Progress Party is another organization. Black Alliance for Peace, Black Hammer, like there's a number of organizations across the United States that are led or completely comprised of African people that are doing the kind of deep work that I'm talking about, but they are almost without exception small as hell and broke, because the majority of our people are not active in organizations. The majority of our people are looking at those symbols and saying like, that's enough. And what I'm saying to you watching this right now is that if you want the example of the Not Fucking Around crew to be spread across the masses of our people in the United States, we have work to do. And if you're not in an organization, you're not helping that work happen. You're actually hindering it. If you're not actively involved in revolutionary organizing to build community defense in your community, among African communities in the United States, you are not helping, you're harming it. So if you want to see, organized Africans with guns taking on the Klan, then we urge you to get into an organization, to begin to do this deep work in African communities to make this possible, to make this happen, and to make it safe. Like, we need our people active in revolutionary organizations, point blank, period. Point blank, period. It is not enough to see that shit on Facebook and be like, yeah, and share it, and then go about your business. That's not enough. You need to be an organization. You need to start fighting for your people. You need to start building up our capacity, building up our consciousness, so that when our people take up guns, when we mob up by the hundreds and try to take on the Klan, that the Klan at the end of that confrontation does not exist anymore. We can do that. We just need to be organized. Let's see what y'all are saying. I see lots of comments. Let me see. Guns to fight. I don't think we need that now. We need our strategies, good strategies like some ideology. Strategy we have to us, the same methods of the U.S. to colonize us. So basically this comrade's saying we don't need guns right now. We need a revolutionary ideology. I don't think those are mutually exclusive. Like, we have a very clear revolutionary ideology within the All African People's Revolutionary Party. We have a really clear political objective, that objective being Pan-Africanism. We have the ideology piece down. We also are beginning to have like the training and armed struggle part down. What we do not have is the numbers. What we do not have is like the masses of our people active in the same fight behind the same ideology and strategy that we are. And so again, I just want to repeat that we need our people active in organizations. If you want to see the example of Not Fucking Around crew expanded, you need to join a revolutionary organization, and you need to help us do this deep work. But yeah, I don't think that ideology and guns are mutually exclusive. And I also think that for those of us living in the United States, the reality situation is that these Europeans are armed and organized, and they're becoming more armed and organized every day. And so if we are on any level afraid to do the kind of like training and education required to meet them on that level, we're just going to get caught slipping. We're just going to get in a bad situation. So yeah, I don't know if I believe that those are mutually exclusive. Anywho, yes, they fear our power, which is why they tried to squash it so many times. That is correct. The reason why Europeans, particularly the United States, have like an existential fear of what African people are going to do is, one, because they're afraid we're going to do to them what they did to us, but two, because they cannot predict what we're going to do. Like, my comrade Ajamu always refers to African people in the U.S. as like the X factor, meaning that they have worked really hard to like assimilate us. They've worked really hard to pacify us. They've worked really hard to reframe the terms of our struggle so that the objective in the mainstream is for African people to be integrated into U.S. society, while their objective should actually be for African people to destroy U.S. society. But they basically worked really, really hard to make it so we're not going to be a threat. But no matter what they have done, and no matter the fact that they've been at this for centuries, they have never actually successfully pacified African people in the United States. No matter what they do, we always have this pattern of getting shit on until we explode, until cities burn down, until uprisings sweep across the entire hemisphere. Like, no matter what they have done, this has been the recurring pattern among African people in the United States. Like, no matter what they do, they cannot pacify us. So we are the X factor, because they have no idea which way we're going to go in the end. And that's actually like a strength. That's actually like a really strong advantage that we have in this context. And like sometimes I've seen like a lot of people, Africans wearing shirts like "I am not a threat" or like "hands up, don't shoot," or like basically just like reinforcing how we are not a danger to them. And I'm like, that's a mistake. That's a mistake. You better let these crackers be scared of you. Like, you better use that to your advantage. If they are afraid of what you're gonna do, if you are the X factor, that gives you power in that situation if we're organized. But our people are so colonized in this particular context that we are consumed with explaining to our oppressor that we are not a threat to them. And I'm just like, damn. But that's why the APRP exists. That's why we're organizing. That's why we're trying to do that deep work, so that our people will start to realize the power that we actually have in this situation. What are you saying? What are you saying? Well, what do you want the black militia to do? Like I said, dog, we have to organize in our communities on a deep basis. We can't just take up guns one day, go home, be like, sweet, we did it. We need to build the power of African communities. We need to build permanent institutions in those communities to meet the needs of our people. We need to raise the consciousness of our people, and we need to engage every single sector of African people in this work of building community defense. Can't just be a couple of dudes with guns or couple hundred dudes with guns on one weekend. It has to be the whole community on a consistent basis, point blank. Let me see. Yeah, thanks all of y'all for your comments. Continue putting those in there, and I'll continue addressing them. But we're going to keep it moving because I have to go to work at some point. So next up on the show, we want to talk about some COVID-19 updates. What is going on with this pandemic? Like I said earlier, I'm speaking to y'all from occupied Tiwa territory, also known as New Mexico, in the United Snakes. And the United Snakes is currently the worldwide epicenter of the global pandemic. The United States is by far the nation handling the pandemic the worst. It is the richest empire on the face of the planet, and yet has failed at every turn and on every single level to adequately address this virus. This virus is wrecking the United States. It is somewhat remarkable to watch. But we're just going to continue to reiterate on the show that this pandemic is not over, and it's also real, and it's also killing our people the most in the United States. Like, we are the highest proportion of people dying from this virus. And that is a consequence of colonialism. That is a consequence of capitalism. That is a consequence of like the deliberate underdevelopment and disinvestment in our communities. The deliberate like icing out of our people from jobs that have benefits. The deliberate pushing of our people into jobs where they are being forced to go into work for no money with no health care during a pandemic. And so as a consequence, that people are dying the most, which means every single one of us has a responsibility to move collectively for our collective health. So, we need people to continue to wear masks. We need y'all to continue to wash your hands. We need y'all to continue to stay out of crowds. We need y'all to continue to stay home as much as you are able. Like, we understand some people don't even have homes. Some people have a home situation that is extremely dangerous, where it's not safe to be. And so when we say stay home, that means if you are a person that's privileged to have a safe place to lay your head, that you stay up in there as much as you're able. So that way the folks that do not have that privilege, that do not have access to safe housing, are safer because they have to deal with less people. But basically, the reality situation in the United States is that this government's not going to do what it needs to do. This government has already allowed thousands of African, indigenous, and colonized people to die, and it's going to continue to allow thousands of African, indigenous, colonized people to die. Which means in addition to wearing a mask, in addition to washing your hands frequently whenever you touch anything, including your phone, or like a doorknob outside, wash your goddamn hands. In addition to staying out of crowds and staying home as much as you're able, we also have a responsibility to organize, to protect our people during this pandemic. Which means, again, if you are watching this show and you're not active in a revolutionary organization, you need to join an organization. You need to get off the sidelines. If you're not in an organization, you are on the sidelines. You need to get into the fight. We in the African People's Revolutionary Party have been delivering masks to our people all over the world. We have been delivering care packages and groceries to families in Albuquerque and occupied Tiwa territory. We have been making weekly announcements, sharing information about the virus that we know the government is not going to do. We are basically taking up the work of public health in order to support our people during this time, and we're able to do that because we are organized. And if you're just like an individual trying to do that work on your own, it's just not going to be effective. But if you join an organization like ours, or an organization like Black Hammer, or an organization like Ojima People's Party, and you contribute to a collective doing that work, you can have a much bigger impact. So again, wear a mask, wash your hands, stay out of crowds, stay home as much as you can, and join an organization. Get off the sidelines. I hope if you're not in an organization, you're taking this hella personally and you're getting mad at me right now, because I want you to get mad at me right now. I want you to take it personally. I want you to feel called out so that you are motivated to join an organization. Other things that are happening with COVID-19 in the snakes, the world's worst outbreak is happening here. Places like Florida are seeing thousands upon thousands of new infections every day. And against this backdrop, access to testing is becoming harder and harder for regular people. If you don't have health insurance and you want to get a COVID test, good luck. Good luck. It is increasingly difficult to even get those tests, which means that even the number of positive infections in the United States, which at this point I believe Monica posted there's like several million, even that number is by no question like way off. There's no question that there's no one that has any concept of how many people actually have this virus in the United States. Like there's no possible way they could, because people cannot access these tests. And even if they are able to get tested, red states, random cities are just deciding to withhold the correct information. And on top of that, now the Trump administration has directed that all testing data from these COVID-19 tests go directly to them rather than to the CDC, rather than to the Center for Disease Control. And so now the Trump administration is going to be the filter for any new information about infections in the United States. I don't know about you, but I don't believe that they're going to tell the truth about that. And so at this point, it's very, very obvious that we have no concept of how many people actually have this virus in the United States. We have no concept of how bad the situation actually is, which means, again, the responsibility for the collective health of African and colonized communities is going to be in the hands of our organizations, which means if you're not in one of those organizations, you're not helping. We need you off the sidelines. We need you in the fight. We need you helping us to build a response, to build community defense, to build protection for our people during this pandemic, because the government is not going to do it. The government is going to let us die, and they're going to cover it up. Also happening in the United States is the Department of Education under Betsy DeVos is pushing extremely hard for in-person openings of K-12 schools in the United States. Even though, like I just said, no one has any concept of how many people actually have this virus in the United States. Even though, like I just said, most people don't have health care and most people can't even get a test to find out they have a virus, this government is saying it is safe to send children back to school. And let me tell you something. I don't have any kids, but that makes no sense to me. If I did have children, there's absolutely no way that I would send them to a U.S. public school at this particular point in time. I remember what school was like. I remember that shit being filthy. I remember going to lunch and being like surrounded by like 100 people, like at all times, like from the hallway to the lunchroom. So I just don't understand how they think this is gonna work and why there is anyone whatsoever listening to Betsy DeVos and being like, yeah, that seems reasonable, that seems safe. It is not safe at this point to reopen schools. It's not safe at this point to even reopen motherfucking restaurants or grocery stores, because this country has never had this pandemic under control. This country has no intention of ever having this pandemic under control. And from the very, very beginning, the pandemic response in the United States has been about protecting the profit margins of corporations and businesses, and not at all about people's health or like the continued living of human beings. Yeah, like Monica's saying, we will never know what the real data will look like, especially now that the Trump administration is receiving the data and stripped us away from the role of the CDC. Yeah, I was like really confused about why that wasn't a bigger story, because that's why they want the data to go directly to them, because they want to make the pandemic look less bad. They understand, like at this point, almost every single nation on earth, except for Mexico and Tanzania for some reason, has said that U.S. citizens are not allowed to travel within their borders. Has said because the U.S. government cannot guarantee the health of U.S. citizens that are traveling, that they are not allowed to enter all of these foreign nations. Like all of Europe is like the United States cannot come into our borders. Most of Africa, except for Tanzania, is like the United States citizens cannot come into our borders. So like that is because the entire rest of the world sees what's happening in the United States, and they're like, dear God, we have to protect ourselves from this. And so the Trump administration realizes that. There's only so long that U.S. citizens can be like locked out of all these economies without it having a drastic effect on the U.S. economy. And so they're trying to do damage control. They're trying to make it seem less bad. And so that is why they want control over the numbers. And it's going to get much worse. And so I'm going to wrap up this segment. Actually, one more thing before I wrap it up. But I want to say again that we need you to wear a mask. We need you to wash your hands. We need you to stay out of crowds. We need you to stay home as much as you're able if you have a safe home to stay in. And most importantly, no matter who you are, we need you to join an organization fighting for justice in this time, because we need you in the fight to help people survive this pandemic. Period. If you're not an organization, you are not helping. You are hurting the struggle. And the last thing I want to say is that even though the United States has just failed on every level to deal with the situation, even though the richest empire on earth, the United States, has all the wealth it requires to make it so people don't die, it is choosing not to. That is not what it looks like everywhere. It doesn't actually have to be like this. For example, in Cuba, they have experienced no new cases of COVID-19 in 4 weeks. No community spread and no positive infections reported in Cuba in the last 4 weeks, in the last month. And the reason for that is because Cuba, despite being a desperately poor country that we hear nothing but constant lies about, has an economy, has a government, a form of government that is centered around humanity and life rather than profit. So when a pandemic hits in Cuba, or when climate change hits in Cuba, or when shortages hit in Cuba because of the U.S. blockade, the Cuban government's response is to say, how can we make sure that our people are good, regardless of anything that's happening? And so when the pandemic was first like a thing, when it first hit the scene in January, the Cuban government was already like, okay, we're going to organize doctors to go door to door in every single community and talk to people about this virus. We're going to give people information on TV, at their door, in community spaces about what the virus is, about what it does to you, and about how to avoid getting it. We're going to send nurses into communities to test people on a mass basis, to take their temperatures. If they test positive, we're going to give them treatment, and we're going to give them that treatment on a daily basis. Basically, Cuba organized a response that made sure that every single person had access to healthcare and information. And on top of that, once it became clear that the only way to control the spread of COVID-19 was going to be for people to quarantine, Cuba was like, word, y'all have to stay home, so we're going to make sure that you don't have to pay any rent. We're going to make sure your housing's covered. We're going to make sure your bills are covered. We're going to make sure that you have food on a daily basis. And we're going to make it so that you can stay home without having to make a sacrifice and without having to lose your livelihood. That is what Cuba did. This is what this very, very poor country did. This is what this so-called dictatorship that we're taught in the United States is oppressing its own people did. Cuba said, folks have to stay home. We're going to make sure you have healthcare. We're going to make sure you have housing. We're going to make sure you have food for the duration of this pandemic. So we have this example of Cuba, which is like less than 100 miles off the shore of the United States, who was able to completely stop community spread of COVID-19 just by treating people like human beings, just by caring about whether or not people lived or died and putting resources in that direction. We see the example of how that worked in Cuba, and then we see the example of how it works when you put capitalism before life in the United States. And also, in addition to Cuba sending doctors door to door and taking care of their own people, Cuba has also sent doctors to over 35 countries around the world to fight this pandemic. When Italy was the hotspot a few months ago, when they had thousands upon thousands of people dying, and the rest of Europe was like, damn, well, good luck with that. Like, they locked down their borders and tried to isolate Italy. And that shit was hilarious to me because Europe is a pretty small landmass. So even if you lock down your borders, that's not going to contain it in that one area. The rest of Europe just played itself and abandoned Italy. Left Italy to die to try to save themselves. It didn't work. That shit spread. But the point being that the European Union is supposed to be this model of international cooperation. But when the shit hit the fan, the European Union was good luck to you. We will see you later. And when Italy was can we get a loan to try to fight this? They were no. They were just never mind, fuck you. But you know what Cuba did? Cuba sent doctors to Italy. Cuba sent doctors, thousands of doctors to Italy to help them get the pandemic under control. They sent medicine. They sent interferon alpha 2B, which is a medication that boosts your body's immune response, and it helps patients fight COVID-19. So when the European Union was good luck to you, sir, and left Italy to die, Cuba stepped in and saved Italy. Cuba sent doctors to Spain. Cuba sent doctors to China. Cuba sent doctors to dozens of nations in Africa. Cuba sent doctors to nations all over the Caribbean, all over Central and South America. All of these places that were being abandoned by the richest nations on earth, by the United States and by the European Union, were aided by this incredibly poor country, this incredibly poor socialist country. And thank God that did happen. Sometimes I think about what the pandemic would be like if Cuba didn't exist. And yeah, it would just be much worse. It would just be terrible. So yeah, shout out to Cuba. And the reason why we keep bigging up in Cuba, aside from the fact that Cuba is lit, and Cuba is a nation with a majority African population that is doing this work, by the way, the reason why we keep up in Cuba is because we want to show the contrast versus what's happening in the United States around this pandemic and versus what's happening in Cuba, a nation that actually cares about people. We want to say, it doesn't have to be this way. We don't actually have to accept this kind of failure from a government. We can do so much better. We just need to accept that capitalism is not ever going to be the solution. We have to accept that we need a revolution to win socialism. The U.S. government is just utter trash. All these things that we've been taught about how the U.S. is the freest and best nation on earth are falling apart in front of our very eyes. So we're going to keep doing this compare and contrast between what the U.S. is doing and what socialist nations like Cuba, like Venezuela, and Vietnam are doing. Because folks here have to know we don't have to deal with this. Folks here have to know that we outnumber the ruling class that is allowing us to die. And all it's going to require for us to stop this is for the masses of people to be organized and for the masses of people to wage a revolution, to overthrow capitalism in the United States, to get indigenous people their land back, and to institute a socialist system that's going to actually value life. So join an organization. Get off the sideline. Let's make this happen because, yeah, this government's going to let you die. Anywho, those are COVID updates. Thanks y'all for your comments. Monique is saying what's happening as Cuba is what you call a comprehensive plan. That's which is not what that looks like in this country. There's literally no plan for anything in the United States. If there was an earthquake in New Mexico tomorrow, there would be no plan to help people. There would be no strategy whatsoever for rebuilding, for digging people out of the rubble, for nothing. Any kind of natural disaster hits and you are basically on your own. And if you do not believe me, if you can't even look at the pandemic response and be that's true, then look at what happened after Hurricane Katrina and look at what happened after Hurricane Maria. And both of those situations, Hurricane Katrina was 20 years ago? In both of those situations, thousands of U.S. citizens were left to die. Thousands of U.S. citizens died because the U.S. government was not able to organize a relief response. We literally watched that shit happen on the news for weeks after weeks after weeks. We saw African people's corpses floating down main streets in New Orleans because the Bush administration had no motherfucking plan. All they had was press conferences and titles. They had no plan whatsoever to deal with that. And the same thing happened 10 years later, 20 years later in Puerto Rico for Hurricane Maria. And Puerto Rico is still not rebuilt. There's massive sections of Puerto Rico that still don't have power. And that's supposed to be like those are supposed to be like U.S. citizens. There has never been a plan. No matter what catastrophe strikes, the U.S. government will never have a plan. Because the U.S. government does not care about the health and safety of its population. The U.S. government cares about the wealth of people like Jeff Bezos and corporations. And that's it. There is no plan to save you. Which means we, as like regular people, need to develop the plan and develop the organization to execute that plan. Because they're gonna let us die. They're going to let us die. Anywho, COVID-19 updates. That was that. Next up, we want to talk about what's going on in the African world with this whole pandemic. So first up, the World Health Organization is reporting over 10,000 health workers on the African continent have at this point been infected with COVID-19. Also, UN economic sources are reporting the number of remittances to the continent from the diaspora have gone down. If you don't know what a remittance is, it's basically when you have an immigrant community that sends money back home to their home country. Like my family is from Honduras, and all of my moms, my aunties, my uncles, my cousins, they would travel to the United States to work, and they would send that money back home to the community in Honduras. And that's something that's like extremely common among immigrant communities in the United States, particularly in African immigrant communities. But since the start of the pandemic, that money being sent back home has decreased. And the reason for that is because millions of people lost their jobs in the United States. And so now they straight up don't have the money to send back home. And that has a ripple effect because families in Africa, communities in Africa heavily depend on that money. They heavily depend on those remittances. And so when the quantity goes down, communities in Africa suffer. There's like a symbiotic relationship between the economy in the United States and like the employment that our people have access to, and then like the livelihood of communities back home in Honduras and in Central and South America. And so now we're seeing across the continent impacts on the livelihood and economies of these African communities because they're not able to get this money sent from overseas because the folks in the United States lost their jobs and there's no unemployment and there's no help coming. And so it's really, really interesting to see how connected the diaspora actually is to the continent, particularly because we are always told in the United States that there's no connection whatsoever. But as we can see, that is not actually the case. Other things happening on the continent is that Uganda has seen its first confirmed death from COVID-19, and now they have a total number of 1,079 positive cases in that nation. So we're going to continue to give y'all updates about what's happening in Africa around this virus, and that was the news for today. Next up, we got New Mexico updates. So lots of stuff happening in New Mexico. If you are a person who still listens to Trump speak for whatever ungodly reason, then you probably saw at his press conference yesterday that Operation Legend is coming to the city of Albuquerque to occupy Tiwa territory, in addition to a number of other cities around the U.S. For folks that don't know, Operation Legend is basically sending a number of federal pigs to occupy Tiwa territory to assist the pigs here that were already terrorizing colonized people. But even before Operation Legend, there was Operation Relentless Pursuit, which is basically the same thing. A number of federal funding and federal pigs were already in Albuquerque, already terrorizing people in the International District. And even before Operation Relentless Pursuit, there had been federal stings where the department, DEA, was working alongside the state police and the Albuquerque police and the FBI to again terrorize colonized communities. So when we say, Operation Legend is sending the feds to Albuquerque, we also have to understand that they were already motherfucking here. Before that, there was Operation Relentless Pursuit. Before that, there was the DEA sting in the International District that disproportionately targeted African people in that community. Even though we're only something like 3% of the African population in Albuquerque, we were I can't remember the exact percentage, but a very large percentage of the arrests in that sting. And that was 2 years ago. That was when I first moved here. So yeah, there's a long history of federal government and local police collaboration in this city, on this land. And the other thing is that, there's a lot of anxiety around Operation Legend because of what's been happening in Portland, Oregon. For those that don't know, in Portland, Oregon, a number of federal police agencies like ICE, like Border Security, like the DEA, have been helping Portland police, brutalize Black Lives Matter protests. They've been snatching people off the streets into literal rental vans, like unmarked minivans rented from like Enterprise Rent-A-Car is what these feds are using. They're like dragging people off the street into these vans and then dropping them off at home a couple of days later. So that's been happening in Portland during the Black Lives Matter protests. And so Operation Legend is creating a lot of anxiety to folks because the concern is that this model that's happening in Portland is going to be exported to these cities that are being targeted by Operation Legend. However, what happened in Portland, what's happening in Portland with protesters being snatched off the street by armed men that don't identify themselves is not new. It did not start in Portland. People have been being snatched off of U.S. streets by strange armed men for decades. Like, ICE enforcement under the Obama administration, which saw the greatest quantity of people being deported from the United States in history, that's exactly what it looked like. If you are an undocumented person in the United States, if you are an immigrant in the United States, if you're even like a brown person who's a citizen, but like racists might think that you're not, you have been subjected to strange men snatching you off of the street or snatching out of your home in the middle of the night and dissipating your ass for a very, very long time. But when that shit was happening, the only folks that were really saying anything were immigrants and the folks in the immigrant community themselves. When it was happening to colonized people, the only folks that were really crying out were colonized people. And it was happening even before ICE. Like, that's why abolish ICE is like an inadequate demand. I heard the fucking, what's that lady's name? God damn it. AOC say that we need to abolish ICE and then like split up the duties of ICE to all these other agencies, or like bring back what was it called, INS. When INS was around, they were enforcing the shit the same way. They were snatching people off the street and deporting them without telling their families. Like, that is what immigration enforcement in the United States has always looked like. They were always snatching people off of the street and deporting them without a trial. That was always the case. And beyond ICE enforcement, the police were snatching people off of the street. Homan Square in Chicago, if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's HOMAN. Homan Square in Chicago was like literally a black site in the middle of the major U.S. city of Chicago, where after police would snatch people off the street and like put bags over their head, would bring them into this facility at Homan Square, deny them access to a lawyer, and keep them for sometimes months at a time while torturing them. And this happened for decades in Chicago. This happened for decades. And so when someone says to me, oh my God, they're snatching people off the streets in Portland. Oh my God, it's so scary. Oh my God, Operation Legend's coming to Albuquerque. They're going to put me in a van. I'm like, shit, dog. Like, that was already happening. And the only people that cared were the folks that were directly impacted. This is like the recurring lesson of, social justice organizing in the United States. People have this tendency to develop like really intense tunnel vision, where they can see atrocities unfolding all around them, where they can see people being like black bagged, like dragged into fucking black sites, where they can see, U.S. military and U.S. trained police like brutalizing people all over the world. They can see that shit happening and they can look away. They can ignore it. They can say it's happening over there or it's happening to this group. It doesn't affect me, so I'm just going to keep it pushing. But then the moment that it starts happening to Europeans, the moment that it starts happening to activists, all of a sudden it's like, this has to be stopped. We must organize against it. But when it's happening for decades before that, there was no concern. There was no conversation. Even when Operation Relentless Pursuit came to Albuquerque, even when that was announced that feds were going to start cooperating with the Albuquerque police, and even though there had already been that precedent of the feds cooperating with police to terrorize African and colonized people in the city, like very, very few people talked about Operation Relentless Pursuit. Outside of like the abolitionist organizations and outside of like people that were already doing work around police terrorism, you didn't really see people in the activist community talking about Relentless Pursuit. The feds were already here. They were already here, and they were already in the international district terrorizing people. But people didn't care until Europeans started getting put in bans in Portland. Like, y'all, like, this is how we get caught slipping. We have to call it out every single time. We have to organize against it, no matter if it's directly impacting us or not. These people, like, they telegraph what the fuck they're gonna do. They let you know. If they were able to snatch people off of U.S. streets for decades, and people didn't say a thing about it because they were brown, these feds already knew that they could do it to us, they could do it to activists, they could do it to Europeans, and not a goddamn thing would happen. Not a goddamn thing would happen. People call Portland the test case, but that was not the test case. INS and ICE was the test case. Home and Square was the test case. The way that African revolutionary organizations were surveilled, attacked, and destroyed was the test case. When that shit happened, the way that the U.S. military and U.S. trained police forces brutalize and surveil and destroy people's movements all over the world was the test case. When that shit happened and U.S. citizens didn't say anything, the U.S. government knew that they could do that shit to y'all and nothing was going to happen. So the lesson of this situation is that you need to call it out every time, no matter who it happens to, and you need to understand that this has been happening for a very, very long time, to silence as a response. Let's see what y'all are saying. Jay's in there. Trump's Gestapo starts expanding. It's not Trump's Gestapo. It's not Trump's Gestapo. The drastic expansion of deportations happened under the Obama administration. The ICE infrastructure that Trump is using was built under the Obama administration, and even before that. Like, people saying that this is something that's happening because of Trump are people that are missing what's actually going on. Just gonna be real with y'all. And if people say, oh, it's just Trump, they're going to convince themselves that voting him out is all that needs to happen to stop this. And if that's what y'all do, then you're going to miss the fact that it's been happening for decades, that this is the nature of the United States. Like that, like putting that stuff on Trump is a strategic error. Anywho, let's see. My grandma spent so much time teaching me Jewish and immigrant history to be ready for shit like this. Folk have looked the other way for decades, so thankful for your truth telling. Correct. Like, I'm very sure the Jewish community knows precisely what I'm talking about. I'm very sure, because this is precisely what the lead up to the Holocaust looked like. So yes, absolutely. Yeah, America itself has been the test case. Look at how insidious American suppression is. Absolutely. Like, America is the kind of place, or the U.S., because America is like this whole hemisphere, but the U.S. government's the kind of place that will, like, kill grandmas and then put grandma on the stamp and be like, she's our hero. Like, the way the U.S. government works is to, like, commit atrocities and then pretend they were the good guy the whole time. And the unfortunate thing is that the U.S., like, the citizenry, the population of the U.S., has, like, bought into that shit hook, line, and sinker. So that when Trump came in, people were like, oh my God, this is not who we are. I can't believe, blah, blah. Like, they were just, like, shocked that Trump was elected. Because there is not a mass understanding among the population of the U.S. about what this place actually is. There's a lot of people still living under the delusion that this place is, like, good at heart, and that Trump is, like, somehow an aberration from, like, a long history of goodness. Nope. It's important to understand that this is what the United States has always been. And the only difference now is that what's been happening to colonized people, what's been happening to African indigenous people, what's been happening to Puerto Rican people and all colonized populations in the United States is now happening to Europeans and the activist community. And that's why people all of a sudden are paying attention. Other things happening here in Albuquerque is the city of Albuquerque, under Mayor Tim Keller, has put out this mask ordinance requiring folks to wear masks outdoors. However, this past weekend, there were anti-mask protests at Civic Plaza. One of them called themselves the We Can't Breathe protest, which is a very clear reference to Eric Garner, who was murdered by New York City police on camera saying, I can't breathe. And so these Europeans had this anti-mask protest. They open carried at Civic Plaza, folks reported. And despite the fact that there were hundreds of people not wearing not wearing masks, despite the fact that there were probably several people open carrying in Civic Plaza, when there has been an ordinance passed saying that weapons cannot be open carried in Albuquerque's parks, there was very little police enforcement of the anti-mask protest. But then the next day, African and colonized community members organized a counter demonstration to protest these Europeans using the phrase "we can't breathe" for their reactionary ass bullshit. And almost immediately, the people at the counter demonstration were, 2 of them are arrested. 2 African men were arrested for open carrying, and 7 people got tickets for not wearing a mask, I believe. And so what we are seeing here in the city of Albuquerque, here in occupied Tiwa territory, is very unequal enforcement of regulations around masks and of regulations around open carrying in Albuquerque's parks. What we are seeing is European settlers with reactionary politics having police be very friendly to them and be like, how can we be here to help you? And feel free to demonstrate and execute your First Amendment rights. But when African people are like, can y'all put a mask on your goddamn face? And can y'all not reference the murder of one of our people? The police react very differently. They show up in riot gear. They show with military weapons. They arrest people. And they generally harass the folks that are speaking out for justice. And so when folks went to Tim Keller and they were like, what the hell is this? What is this obvious double standard? What the city of Albuquerque said was that protests are excluded from the mask ordinance. They said, if you're at a protest, there is no requirement to wear a mask. I just have to pause for a second, because what the fuck kind of sense does that make? Are you in a space where it's hundreds of people all together? I've been to a couple of Black Lives Matter marches here in Albuquerque, and the African People's Revolutionary Party has helped out at securities at some of those marches and at some of these community events, and it's literally hundreds of people. And when you go to a Black Lives Matter march, almost everyone is wearing a mask. And so when we were doing these events, when we were helping out security and supporting the community, I was very, very concerned that I was going to get COVID-19. And a number of us in APRP were very concerned we were going to get COVID-19. And we all got tested afterwards, and we came back negative. And you know why? It's because everybody at the protest was wearing a mask. So what the hell? What kind of sense does it make for this man, for this city to say, in a gathering of hundreds of people, where we've already seen that wearing a mask controls the spread, to say that is a situation where a mask is optional? My God, they are literally bending over backwards to accommodate these reactionary ass anti-mask Europeans. They are doing illogical and irrational things to justify criminalizing African people speaking up for social justice while looking at the other way, while Europeans do incredibly antisocial shit. It's so obvious. It's so obvious in this city, the different kind of enforcement. And this is coming from a very, very long trend of the city of Albuquerque and the Albuquerque police engaging these European reactionaries in this way. Because even before the irrational exception for the mask ordinance, the New Mexico Civil Guard and a number of the militias in Albuquerque were working directly with the police. At the protest a month ago, where one of them shot somebody, where a European reactionary shot somebody, the New Mexico Civil Guard protected them until the police got there. So there's been a very, very high level of coordination between the Albuquerque police and the city of Albuquerque and these reactionary ass Europeans and these militias. And this exception of the mask ordinance is just another example. Another example of the double standard, another example of the collaboration, another example of what, African and indigenous and colonized people fighting for justice in the city are up against. We gotta call it out. And also, man, these Europeans are about to take themselves out with this virus, man. If you're gonna have a protest of hundreds of people and y'all are not gonna wear masks, you're gonna get someone sick, you're gonna kill your nana, and it's fucking ridiculous that the city is co-signing that just to, rationalize their racism, just to rationalize the double standard. That shit's bananas. Anywho, other things happening in Albuquerque. We have said this every show. We're going to keep saying it every show as we also continue to start organizing around this. Is that the eviction moratorium is bullshit. The eviction moratorium is bullshit. So Governor Michelle Houlihan Grisham, at the beginning of the pandemic, announced this eviction moratorium across the state of New Mexico, where allegedly, or she claimed that landlords would not be able to proceed with evictions as long as the tenant could prove that they could not pay rent due to the pandemic. What that meant in practice was that landlords could still file evictions, and tenants would have to go before a judge and prove they couldn't pay their rent during the pandemic. You had to prove it to the judge's satisfaction, and there was like no like uniform standard of evidence. So like it was up to the judge's discretion to decide whether or not you could pay, even if it was like obvious. So off top, that's like problematic. Like maybe people have to like deal with the court when they've already been out of work for months to avoid getting evicted, and then like if the judge is like, I don't believe you, you still get evicted. Like it was not a real thing from the beginning. But on top of that, even if someone could, put off the eviction because they convinced the judge, if the eviction is put off but rent is still being charged, when the moratorium is up, all that means is that this person who couldn't work for several months is going to owe thousands of dollars in back rent that they won't be able to pay because they haven't been able to work for several months, which means they're still going to get evicted. It's just delaying the inevitable because you're still allowing people to be charged rent, and it's making what's going to happen at the end even worse. So that was the situation from the very beginning. It was a situation where some evictions, not even all of them, some evictions were paused and people were still accumulating rent. And now we're coming to the end of this moratorium in New Mexico and also around the United States, and nothing has been done to address this contradiction. Nothing has been done to address the fact that millions of people lost their jobs, millions of people have not been able to pay rent for several months, and millions of people have no income coming in to pay that back rent. And so from the very beginning, an eviction moratorium was not enough. From the very beginning, what was needed was an absolute freeze on rent, an absolute understanding that if people cannot work, they cannot pay rent. Like, it's so obvious, but everybody from the governor of New Mexico to every single representative of Congress is like struggling with that basic concept. It's like struggling with understanding that if people can't work, they can't pay their bills. I don't understand this. I guess because like they're millionaires, like they're really wealthy, and so that's why they don't get that people just don't have like money lying around they can use to pay rent when they're not working. But the reality situation is that we are being led directly into a massive housing crisis. We're being led directly into a wave of evictions that's going to make people houseless across the state and across the country. And no one in power anywhere is doing anything realistic to address that or to fix it. Which means again, that as African, indigenous, colonized, and working class people, we have a responsibility to organize to defend our communities from this crisis. We have a responsibility to organize to defend our communities during the pandemic, and we have a responsibility to organize to defend our communities from this eviction crisis. Organize tenants unions, organize eviction defense, so people cannot be put out into the street during a pandemic without a fight from their neighbors. We need to have our people joining organizations and active in building in organizations, because I guarantee you, what's coming is not going to be pretty. What's coming is going to be mass homelessness. And in response, the state is not going to like put people in housing. The state is going to send police with guns. The state is going to send police with tanks. The state is going to respond to poverty and houselessness with violence, because that is what the state does. And so that means we, as the people that are going to be targeted by that violence, have to organize a response to protect each other, because it is coming. We're doing that work in the APRP. If you're not an organization, get off the sidelines, get in the fight, because it's coming for your ass too. Other things. In addition, so we talked about a series of poor decisions on the part of the city of Albuquerque's government, and we're going to talk about another poor decision on the part of the city of Albuquerque's government. So, APS has announced that they are going to try to reopen in person. APS stands for Albuquerque Public Schools. We have a comrade in New Mexico chapter who works in Albuquerque Public Schools, and she was kind enough to write up her top 5 issues with the APS reopening plan. And so I'm not going to read directly from it, but I just want to let y'all know that this plan is a hot mess. So just like a sampling. The district has asked that the parents check temperatures and monitor for any possible COVID symptoms before they send their child back to school. This is not an unreasonable ask. The problem is, even before COVID, parents would send their kids to school sick as fuck. Parents do this 95% of the time because they can't afford to miss work. Children are absolutely going to come to school with COVID and spread it to their peers and school staff. One of the justifications that I've heard a lot of times for reopening schools in person in the fall, even though the pandemic is under no way, shape, or form under control in the United States, is that COVID-19 is less likely to seriously impact children. Like across the world, We have seen lower infection rates in children. And we have also seen when they do get it, it tends to be less severe. However, children can still be carriers of COVID-19. Children can have COVID-19 and not get seriously ill from it, but then pass it to someone else, for example, like an elderly teacher, and get them super fucking sick and possibly kill them. So even though most children who get COVID-19 may not be seriously impacted, the same cannot be said from any folks like their parents or like a teacher or like a janitor or like a lunch lady or like a bus driver who is in proximity to that child and might catch it for them. The other thing is that though children tend to be less impacted from COVID-19, there still have been cases of children catching it and dying. And there still have been cases of children developing serious neurological problems and also developing serious inflammatory diseases that kill them from COVID-19. So it's both, it's like a mistake to say children are not seriously impacted because of like the issues of children dying and of children developing other complications from getting the virus, and also because children are able to pass it to adults who are getting seriously ill from it. So that's one thing. The other thing that CarMed says is that if parents still send their kids to school, the district is asking bus drivers to monitor kids for signs of illness. That is correct. APS is asking bus drivers to diagnose children with COVID-19. I don't know. If I was a bus driver, I would be like, you go to hell with that shit. But, so the kid has made it onto the bus, and now the expectation is that the bus driver is going to notice if a kid is sick. The bus driver has like a whole, like, 30 children behind them acting a fool probably, has to focus on the road so they don't crash the bus, and they're expected to monitor each child for signs of illness. Like, y'all are asking a lot. I bet you those people don't make enough money for that. But, so, let's say a bus driver does notice a sick kid. What is the bus driver supposed to do? The bus driver is supposed to call the APS police. The bus driver is supposed to call the police to have them work with the school to get the kid back home. So a sick kid gets on the bus. The bus driver, by some miracle, with everything else they have to do, notices the kid is sick. The bus driver is supposed to call the cops, and the cops come and do what? Does the kid get escorted off the bus by the APS police? Like, are y'all serious? In this district, with all these African indigenous kids and Chicano kids already being criminalized, you want the police to take them off the bus? What? Like, it's just... Listen to me. So, the ComRade put all, additional information about why this plan is terrible. Actually, let me just run through the rest of them so y'all can see, how stupid this is. But, so the third one they said is one of the many reasons politicians want kids back in school is food insecurity. That makes sense. For a lot of kids, school is their only meal of the day. Their only meal of the day. So that makes sense. There still isn't a reasonable plan to get students to and from the cafeteria for breakfast and lunch. Even with only half the student population being on campus weekly, that's still as many as 600 to 800 kids on campus at the high school level. There is no way to enforce social distancing in the half hour. They have 30 minutes for their lunch break or in the morning for breakfast. So they are expecting... They have no plan for social distancing at lunch. They are expecting kids to be able to, in 30 minutes, get their food and eat it while maintaining social distancing. So while a big argument for why schools need to reopen is food insecurity, as you can see, as our comrade is pointing out, there's actually no plan for making sure that they can even be fed safely, that they can even get a hot meal without also getting COVID-19 in these schools. Oh my God. In addition to that, the comrade points out that these schools were already not clean. There is no deep cleaning that's going to happen because that deep cleaning is supposed to be done by the teachers, and the teachers don't have capacity or time to do that shit because they have to deal with all the other requirements of their regular job in addition to the requirements of the pandemic. So no deep cleaning is going to be happening of these classrooms. There's not enough janitors to do the deep cleaning in between the classes. It's just not going to be a sanitary situation, and that's not the fault of anyone involved. It's the fault of the lack of resources that are already being given to the school that are going to be exacerbated by these pandemics, or by this pandemic. So So, in conclusion, the comment says the return plan is extremely flawed, and I hope that this breakdown we gave y'all shows you why. The best option, in her opinion, is to keep children at home. Is to do online-only classes. And that's like, it's like everybody's stuck in a rock and a hard place because of the absolute failure of the U.S. government at all levels to deal with this pandemic. Because the reality situation is, for like kids with special needs, for kids who are neurodivergent, for kids with like ADHD, like online school is gonna be impossible. And even aside from like different styles of learning or disabilities, like some kids like straight up don't have internet or computers. So like online only school is like cutting out access to like a very significant number of children and not very significant number of families. But the reason why that's still the best option is because the U.S. government has failed at every level to address this pandemic. It has failed schools, it has failed teachers, it has failed parents, it has failed children, it has failed entire communities. And now we are faced with like these impossible choices where it's either send your vulnerable child to school where they can learn the best in person and risk that they get COVID-19 and die, or catch COVID-19 and give it to your family or to someone that's exposed to them, or keep them home and have to figure out how they're going to be taken care of all day while you still have to work, and have to figure out if they're, neurodivergent, how they're going to even be able to learn. If you don't have internet, how they can be able to even access this school. Like, people are being placed in an impossible situation. And we have to remember, it's not because of teachers, it's not because of parents, it's not because of kids. It's because of this government. It's because of the failure of the U.S. government at every single level, federal, state, and local, to actually deal with this pandemic. It's because from the very beginning, the U.S. has chosen to put profit over life. And we are living with the consequences every single day, and now children are living with the consequences every single day. And it's truly an impossible situation, and we are going to support our community in any way we can with the All African People's Revolutionary Party. I'm going to repeat again that if you are watching this show and you're not an organization, you need to be in an organization helping us build this response to the pandemic, helping us build a people's response to keep folks safe and healthy during this pandemic, because the government is going to let us die. I'm going to keep saying it. They're going to let us die. We're watching it happen. So join the organization fighting for justice. Get off the sidelines. Help us build this response. Help us protect people. Last thing happening in Albuquerque, New Mexico, is that the movement to free Clifton White continues and is growing. Clifton White, for folks that don't know, is a Black Lives Matter organizer here in occupied Tiwa territory. He, alongside his partner, Celinda Guerrero of Millions for Prisoners, and a number of African community organizers, helped mobilize the very first Black Lives Matter action in the city after the murder of George Floyd. And shortly after that action, he was followed and harassed by, pigs in the city of Albuquerque, and then he was arrested on a made-up parole violation. They said he had a warrant. There was no warrant on file. So for over a month, this man has been locked up, has been denied access to his family, has been denied access to a lawyer, has been targeted by the city. And so in response, the city of Albuquerque social justice movement has built this Free Clifton White movement to demand to Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham that she release this man. He has done nothing wrong. His only crime was organizing for justice for African people, and in response, the city of Albuquerque and the state of New Mexico has decided to target him and target his family. If you want to follow the campaign to free Clifton White, if you want to support the campaign to free Clifton White, check out the Millions for Prisoners New Mexico Facebook page. Check out the Building Power for Black New Mexico Facebook page for the latest updates on his case and for the latest updates on how you can support. Also, our comrade Jay just put in the comments a Google Doc with the script. So if folks want to call or email Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham and demand that Clifton White be freed, check out the link that Jay just posted in the comments of our Facebook Live. And it contains a script that you can use when you talk on the phone, like if you're nervous, calling people. That's fine. There's a whole script you can read from directly. So yeah, keep demanding Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham free Clifton White. Keep boosting the hashtag. Keep sharing the post for Millions for Prisoners and Building Power for Black New Mexico. And let the state of New Mexico know that we are not going to let this go. That we are not going to let you disappear this man. That we are not going to accept you targeting organizers in the community. That we are not going to let this go. Let this man go, period, point blank. Let him out, free Clifton White. That's what's good in New Mexico. Next section, third to last section, almost done, is local organizing happening in the city of Albuquerque here in occupied Tijuana territory to support our community during COVID-19. I've mentioned a couple of times that All African People's Revolutionary Party has a community defense program where we are doing weekly deliveries of grocery, personal protective equipment, and supplies to elders all over the city of Albuquerque, to our African elders. We have been doing that since March. We have delivered food to dozens of African people. We are going to continue doing that work. We're going to continue giving out masks. And we need y'all, if you're an African person watching this show, who is interested in helping out that work, who is interested in building permanent institutions for community defense in this city to support the African community, then we need you to join the All African People's Revolutionary Party. We are super fun. We are growing. We doubled the size of our chapter during a pandemic because we are great. And so we are doing big, big things. And we have big, big plans. And we plan to expand and build even more institutions. And so we need you in this fight. We need you to join the work. We need you to get active in our work study process. We need you to help us build up the APRP chapter. We are trying to build independent political power for African people in Albuquerque. We are trying to build institutions of community defense to meet the needs of our people, to make sure that we do not have to depend on a state that's going to let us die during a pandemic for housing, healthcare, or food. In order to do that, we need to build institutions. In order to build institutions, we need strong organizations. So join the All African People's Revolutionary Party if you are an African person in New Mexico watching this show. Hit us up. Hold on, I got the right one with the phone number. Kablow! Hit us up. You can give us a call or send us a text message at 505-295-0008. You can also email us at apripnewmexico@gmail.com if you are interested in joining or if you want more information. Or if you're a person watching this and you at this time would rather support in a different way. We are always accepting donations to support the community defense program, to support our work in New Mexico. You can Venmo us right there. Venmo us at APRP-New Mexico, or rather at APRP-NM. You can also PayPal us at paypal.me/APRP-New Mexico. So if you want to donate cash money to help us buy groceries every week for our elders, or to help us build up institutions in New Mexico, Venmo us or PayPal us. If you want to contact us for more information, or if you have like goods to donate, like masks or shelf stable food, or something that would, or gardening supplies, then you can email us at apripnewmexico@gmail.com. And again, call or text us at 505-295-0008 to coordinate a time to drop that stuff off to us. So that's what we are doing. We are not the only social justice organization in Albuquerque doing great work right now. There's also Albuquerque Mutual Aid that has been doing weekly drop-offs of groceries and supplies to thousands of families. I believe over 11,000 people in the city of Albuquerque since the beginning of the pandemic. So if you want a care package, or if you would like to donate to support Albuquerque Mutual Aid, you can go to ffol.org/mutual aid. And on that page, you'll find a form to request a care package and also information about how you can donate to support that grassroots community effort. Because just like the All African People's Revolutionary Party, Albuquerque Mutual Aid is just a bunch of regular people who decided to organize to meet the needs of their community at this time. They do not have grant funding. They're not a nonprofit. They don't have a rich benefactor or like a movement sugar daddy. It's literally just people, like regular ass people, like your neighbors, coming out of pocket, coming together to support the community. So, yeah, no one is paid to do this. All the organizations are broke. All the organizations need more people. And once again, if you are a person who is not active in an organization, if you are a person that's just kind of watching on social media as these things happen around you, you're not helping. You're on the sidelines. We need you in the fight. Join the fight. Join the organization. Even if the APRP is not for you, join Albuquerque Mutual Aid. Join the Red Nation. Join Black Rose. Join DSA. Like, there's literally so many different organizations doing all kinds of work from all kinds of angles. So even if you're like Pan-African Revolutionary Socialism, that sounds wild, I don't want to do that. There's so many other organizations that are coming at it from a different perspective. So if you don't like the APRP, join one of those. Or if none of the organizations that exist speak to the particular way you view the world, then start your own. But the point is that if you are just out here by yourself, Even if you're doing social justice work, you are not helping unless you are organized and building collective power. We need collective power and collective organization for our people to survive this moment. That's the only way we're going to make it out of this pandemic alive and strong enough to fight for the end of capitalism and for the liberation of our people once and for all. That's it. That's it. Get off the sidelines, join an organization, point blank, period. That's it. There's no excuse. Also, other organizations that are doing great work in Albuquerque, like quiet as it's kept, like Albuquerque actually has like a pretty big and strong and connected left. We're like New Mexico's like a flyover state, I've heard people say, but shit's popping here, quiet as it's kept. So other things that are happening is our comment that Free Access to Movements, also known as FAM, hosts a sing-along and story time on Sundays at 3 p.m. Mountain Time. You can find information about how you and your BBs, your little ones, can join that sing-along by following FAM on Facebook. Once again, FAM stands for Free Access to Movements. They are a radical childcare collective. Back when the All African People's Revolutionary Party New Mexico chapter had in-person events, FAM would do free childcare at all of our events. Like, you please bring your BBs, bring your children to APRP events. Please, like, we understand revolution to be a multi-generational process. Like precisely what I said at the beginning of the show. In order to organize our communities to defend themselves, we need to organize every single sector from the nanas to the babies. So the work that FAM is doing around childcare is directly contributing to that objective of organizing every sector of our community. We need the children in the movement. We need the elders in the movement. We need all sectors of our community in the movement, and FAM helps facilitate that work. And lastly, other great organizing that's happening in New Mexico is our comrades at the John Brown Breakfast Club host a free breakfast burrito giveaway every single Saturday morning at the corner of First and Silver at around 10 a.m. So if you are a houseless or food insecure person who wants a free hot meal from cool people, head to the corner of First and Silver at 10 a.m. on Saturday mornings for a free breakfast burrito. And like I said before, the breakfast burritos are super good. They're really good. But I also just really love breakfast burritos in general. I don't think I've ever had like a bad breakfast burrito. Actually, that's not true. One time I accidentally went to like a gentrification spot in Albuquerque and they put goat cheese in the breakfast burrito and it was horrible and I'm still offended to this day. But the John Brown Breakfast Club burritos are very, very good. You can get one for free at the corner of First and Silver, 10 a.m. on Saturdays, so tell your friends. Last section of the show, I'm just going to leave the donate up while I close the show. So we just briefly want to talk about some upcoming events that are happening here in occupied Tiwa territory and with the APRP worldwide. So first up, our comrades in the queer community are hosting an event called To Bloom in the Desert, which is going to be a celebration of the African and Indigenous LGBT community. That is happening this coming Saturday at Roosevelt Park here in occupied Tiwa territory from 5 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. There will be performances, speakers, organizations tabling, and a giveaway of masks for folks that need one. So if you are someone who is in the African Indigenous LGBTQ community, or if you want to support that community, come out to Bloom in the Desert from 5 to 8:30 p.m. this Saturday at Roosevelt Park in Albuquerque. Also, next week on Wednesday, July 29th, the New Mexico Committee of the Venceremos Brigade is hosting our monthly public meeting. For folks that don't know, the Venceremos Brigade is a solidarity delegation to Cuba, the oldest Cuba solidarity organization in the U.S. The New Mexico Committee of the Venceremos Brigade is the local New Mexico contingent of the Cuba Solidarity Movement. And so we are having public meetings every month to educate our community about Cuba and to have open conversations about what we can learn from the example of Cuba and the Cuban Revolution at this time. On Wednesday, July 29th, we're going to be talking about how Cuba is the most sustainable country on earth. And that's not just me saying that, that's like been confirmed with studies. Cuba's approach to preparing the island for climate change and to preparing its population for climate change is a model that we all need to learn from, because in addition to the pandemic, in addition to the slow fall of capitalism, in addition to rising fascism, we still have to deal with catastrophic climate change that has not stopped or paused. It's still happening. And so Cuba provides an example for what people can do, what nations can do to get folks ready instead of letting them die. And so we're going to talk about that Wednesday, July 29th. To attend, it's going to be streamed live to the New Mexico Venceremos Brigade Facebook page, so like us on Facebook and tune in that Wednesday at 6 p.m., July 29th. Also, the next All African People's Revolutionary Party public event is going to be a drive-in screening of Winnie for our Pan-African film series in order to commemorate Pan-African Women's Month. So that's going to be happening Saturday, August 8th, which is the second Saturday in August, which is when the Pan-African film series always happens. And we're going to be sharing details about how you can join us for that drive-in for free soon. So follow us on Facebook for updates about that. But that is happening Saturday, August 8th. And once again, we're going to be screening Winnie, which is a PBS documentary about Winnie Mandela, who is most well known as the wife of Nelson Mandela, but who was a revolutionary in her own right, and who was arguably more militant than he was. We're going to get into that Saturday, August 8th. Please join us. And lastly, our comrade Ajamu in the California chapter of the All African People's Revolutionary Party also hosts a weekly show. His happens Sundays at 5 p.m. Mountain Time, 5 p.m. Pacific Time, 4 p.m. Mountain Time. And he covers a different topic from a revolutionary African perspective alongside his daughter Shakura every single Sunday for an hour. So we definitely recommend you tune into those. The topic he did last week was why Cuba has no COVID problem, why Cuba has had no cases in 4 weeks. It was really, really great. And so every single week it's a new topic. He has not announced the topic for this coming Sunday, but I guarantee you it's going to be awesome. I guarantee you're going to have a better understanding after it's over, so please check that out. And you can watch that show at facebook.com/ajamu.umi, which is his Facebook page. And you can also find the past episodes of the show on the AAPRP International YouTube channel. So, once again, my name is Onya Sanwu. I am an organizer with All African People's Revolutionary Party New Mexico chapter. I am speaking to y'all from occupied Tiwa territory. We do this show, Weekly Pan-African News Live, every single Thursday at 11 a.m. Mountain Time. And we're going to continue doing the show for the duration of the pandemic and maybe beyond. We'll see how it goes. So yeah, please join us again next Thursday at 11 a.m. Mountain Time. We're going to be talking about organizing what works and what doesn't. From a revolutionary Pan-African perspective, it should be a great conversation. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your comments. I hope you have a really great rest of your day, and I hope you stay ready for revolution. Have a good day.